Ladies and gentlemen, that says it all. We are going to be searching for true EV today. We're going to be reviewing at least 25 hands and getting to the bottom of which line is highest EV. If you like this content, we've got a series by the same name, True EV, over on carrotcorner.com. It is part of our subscription service. So for just $49.99, you can start watching 60-something videos, whatever it's going to be. If you like this format, please do hit that like button. Let me know in the comments, and I will make more speed reviews. Let's get into it. The search for True EV begins. Let's go. All right, let's go. Ace-5 suited in the cutoff. Go ahead and open here, 9-4 deuce. What you'll note about this board is that there's basically hardly any 2-pair possible. There's 4 deuce suited, but the 9 with the really low card isn't a 2-pair combo that really calls. So while there's pocket 9s, pocket 4s, and pocket deuces, our overpairs here, our really big hands, are going to want to go for massive pots on many runouts. This hand is kind of like part value bet, part bluff. We go for the overbet here because it's the type of hand that just loves playing for stacks. We can make straight flushes, nut flushes, all kinds of stuff. And when we've done that, when we've gone ahead and hit the nut flush, we're very glad that the pot's huge. It's also a spot where villain does overfold and starts folding hands like king 4, pocket 7s, pocket 5s. I think a lot of people do just fold those to overbets when they're not sure what they're doing and they don't know how to hit the right defense range. That's also going to be happy days because we're unlikely to win massive pots from those hands anyway if we get there, and we really welcome the fold equity for the times we miss. On to hand 2. I probably wasn't supposed to win this pot. Someone opened 3x here in the cutoff. I've actually started 3xing the button because I think it's great. And I think it might be the right way to play the button in this pool. More on that later. This amazing 3x button secret that's going to transform your game. Right? Maybe not totally transform it, but I do think there's something to this. We'll come to it later. So we go for this bigger 3-bet here against a recreational player. If this was a reg, I'd just go ahead and make it smaller because they're less likely to flat dominated hands and then play badly. But because they're more likely to do that, because I think they're recreational, I can just go ahead and size up here. On 10-6-4, the right play against the recreational is probably the small c-bet actually. But for some reason, I kind of forgot what was going on here, 4-tabling, and I think I made it bigger here, which isn't a disaster and is definitely what you would do in a solver. Oh no, I went for the small one? No, I nearly went for the right sizing and then I decided to go bigger. The reason I like the small sizing here is just that I don't think there'll be that much elasticity on this flop, and I don't think they'll be that sensitive to sizing. I don't hate this though. Obviously going 60% pot here is pretty GTO and it's not going to be a huge mistake by any means. When the 10 turn comes, I figured I would just go for a double barrel with this hand. We unblock diamonds, we do block some ace queen, but there's still plenty of that in the opponent's range, and villain might just decide to start folding here with things like 7s, 8s, and 9s. The other thing about this hand is I figured that recreational players are sometimes going to play really badly here with like king, jack of spades. So instead of finding the jam that they're meant to find with that hand, they might just flat and then check the river and just let us win against that. So if they're going to play draws like that, like 7-8 or spade or something, we can even like win by checking back this river sometimes. They took a bit of time to actually check the river, which actually makes me think that 2 types of hands become more likely. The first type is stuff like 10x that's just trapping, or some kind of bolt like 6x that just got there or something. The other type of hand that's more likely now is like something that can't win by checking, that was considering just donking the river and decided not to. I think that slight tank on the river there is definitely a bit more polarizing to the opponent's range, and is going to make hands like pocket 7s a bit less likely because they just check automatically, right? Villain actually did have 8-7 here for the double gutter, and this is the evidence we want. You know, this hand doesn't really have any business calling turn out of position. It should be jamming or folding, I guess, and just going for this sort of bluff that can also get called by worse sometimes against recreationals. I think it makes some sense. They may fold 5s, they may fold 7s, they may fold ace queen, and then they may actually call with weaker hands here. So overall, I quite like just betting turn, checking back river. That was way more than a minute per hand. I need to sort this out, guys. This is terrible. Okay, hand 3. Sometimes this pool plays so nittily that it actually makes me a bit sick. Like I actually feel a little bit like I want to throw up. It's kind of like a cringy thing. Like if you watch someone embarrass themselves horribly, you're like cringing for them. This is how I feel against people in this pool. So this is hijack against small blind here. I prefer to check back flop with a hand that just welcomes turn bets and just doesn't really... It's going to be really hard for them to make too many mistakes against a flop c-bet here, but some people are just like randomly leading the turn with like 4s or 5s or 6s or 7s or whatever. On the river here, we got checked to a third time, and this kind of gives us the green light. Ace-X is very, very likely to have bet by this point. So just going for some thin value here against like 5s, 7s, etc. They say in theory, you know, you should really reopen for bigger sizes normally, but the 8 is somewhat polarizing and takes away some of those worse hands that can call. Moreover, we lose to like Queen Jack and King Jack, which might play this way, and we're asking villain to call us with some very weak hands like 9s or 4x or 5s or something. So I quite like third pot there. I think it's actually better than B75. Villain shows up with ace 10, we save money against ace x with our sizing on river as well. I think the weaker the sub-range you're trying to get called by here against this nitty pool, the smaller the sizing you want to use on river. If we were value betting an 8 or something, we could go huge because then we welcome the call from the ace. I still think this is like really rare and really nitty, and it's kind of disgusting, but yeah, it's part of the river decision tree here, and probably why I don't want to go for a b75. In hand number 4, we are blind versus blind with 3s. We have flatted and open, and then this happened. We went ahead and flopped bottom set, villain checked. I think what's going on here is that if we think about their range, they mostly have hands that are inelastic to sizing. Like, okay, there's maybe some hands like 5s or ace queen that are a bit sensitive, but I think if they have a 10, a 9, an overpair, a gut shot, like any Broadway hand with straight draw, 8-7, etc., they're going to be continuing. So just going nice and big here with the unblockers to all the stuff around the 10, the 9, the queen, the jack, the straight draws, etc. I think the big bet here is going to be best. The thing is, they're going to under raise, right, in general, if we go small. So relying on the branch where they raise the small bet, it's going to be an inferior way to build the pot than just going for the big bet here. And in position, it's really urgent. It really does matter what we do. Our hand is semi-nutted on turn here. We can lose sometimes, but it's very unlikely. We go for the big bet here. We could also overbet. I think they're going to start freaking a little bit more now with overpairs if we go for the overbet on this card. Might still be the best play. On the ace river, not that much changes actually. They do make some absolutely massive hands like ace 9 and ace 10 that we could try and win everything against now. I decided to pick a sizing that wasn't going to just necessarily scare away every combo of jack 10, king 10, etc. The 16 VPIP players in this pool, if you do jam this ace river here, okay, there's maybe like a little bit of ace queen of spades paying you off or ace 10, ace 9s paying you off, but I think this is a real hot spot for bluffing if you jam here, because I think there's so many like auto turn call river fold hands. So I actually decided to go against the teachings of the Carrot Poker School in this exact spot, against this exact player type, which is like the nittier version. Not go for it all here, but I do think against like recreationals or thinking regs or whatever, my play would just be to jam the river. This is somewhat of an exploit to size down here. We still get the fold, blood from a stone sometimes against the nits of this pool. All right, let's move on. Opens like this are very break even in theory, but what you really want to scan for here is the big blind player. So because the big blind has a 31 VPIP, they're much more likely to be committing major errors than, you know, someone with an 18 VPIP, or like this guy that we just played against that has the picture of the weird cocktail glass with coins in it. Anyway, we check back on the flop here. We could c-bet. We have absolutely nothing going on. And when that's the case, sometimes I just delay my bluff and bluff later in this pool. We face this turn bet. We could maybe raise the turn here because it is going to be like a kind of mergy range containing a lot of stuff. I don't actually hate that play. Facing two bets here, we don't love it on this run out, but we're never folding because we've left villain's range completely unfiltered. I've seen recreational players leading 6s here, leading 4s here, leading ace high, ace 10, ace queen, you name it. All sorts of random stuff. Unfortunately, we did run into the king queen this time, but I think we played this absolutely fine. Checking back, calling turn, calling river. Maybe we can raise turn, but I think it's getting somewhat thin on particularly the king of hearts. I think on a brick turn, I might have a slight preference for leading because they're so much more likely to just upsize all of their hands that beat king 5. That's not so much the case here though, where on the flush turn, they get a bit more timid with two pair and stuff like that, or stronger kings. All right, moving on. So in this hand, we might see, no, we didn't see the 3x. So the 3x button, I've normally been doing it with a really bad hand like this though. I might just like skip on it and not bother. So this is another nitty looking player, like over a decent sample. They start with a 1/3 pot size donk bet here, which is incredibly weird. I decided to just call and see what develops. Raising flop is all right, but I really don't think the investment ceiling against the tighter players is that high with this hand. A bit different against the fish maybe. They go for the pot size turn bet here, which is incredibly bizarre, and clearly in theory our hand is absolutely miles away from a fold. Now, I actually went for a pretty disgusting play on this turn. My instinct was screaming here that pot-sized donk turn from this pool is extremely underbluffed and just likely to be like, I don't know, king 10 plus most of the time, or maybe like a very high EV draw, like a 7-8 or queen 10 or something. I really don't see this play being made with like gut shot and worse. And so I figured that I have a bluff catcher in a spot that I just never ever see. And the fact that I just don't see this from the tight people in pool, like pot is death, right? Bet size equals hand strength. When they pot it here, okay, my hand is really under repped. It's button versus small blind. My hand is clearly like very good for the configuration, but against that sizing and player type, I actually think I'm just getting taken to Greed Town there incredibly often. And after all, if we can't make these really big exploits, how are we going to have a huge win rate? How are we going to beat the rake on GG? How are we going to do any of that? I went for a fold here. This is clearly very unbalanced and I'm massively overfolding, and we need to be careful here against anyone that was close to balance. I just think this is really underbluff for this sizing, for this line. It's a recreational player with a good hand more often than not, and we have a bluff catcher. So I let it go. Flame me in the comments, let me have it. I'm going to stand by it for now though, but I will take into account if anyone thinks I'm a huge whale for this fold. Alright, moving on. You know, such a massive part of playing a pool like this is just navigating against recreationals. We get tiny 3-bet here by the big blind, and we get a flop of 8-6 deuce. So here, bet size and hand strength are just going to be very closely correlated. Like, what you'll see people do in this spot is actually just downsize here when they have ace king, ace queen a lot of the time, and save the bigger sizing for the overpair. So we just went ahead and just folded the spot right away. I think it's somewhat close, and this is just all bet size related basically, right? So against anything half pot or lower, you probably want to call. Then you want to just start folding against the bigger bets. It really is a valuable rule that's going to stand you in good stead. It would not be a carrot corner video without a bit of spew. So we have the 6-5 off here. We've peeled in the big blind after a min open and a call from small blind. I think this is a massive edge spot where multi-way people are going to be relatively straightforward. We have a hand that's quite live, connected, etc. I just fancy my chances in this spot for 1,000,000 to 1, and it's the right kind of hand, I think, to call in theory anyway. We expect to see quite a lot of c-betting here. Some people do control their game a bit multi-way. This is also half pot, which is a little bit stronger, but this is a snap call. So it's very rare that this is going to be better than one pair, right? There's going to be like ace-x a lot. It's going to be some other hand. And we have exactly the kind of hand that blocks 2-pair and sets. And it's just a very intimidating spot for us to raise here. So risking 11 here to win 12, and with a lot of nutty redraw against the ace-x region, I think this is just a winning raise that a lot of people fail to make. The EV of calling the 5 here is going to go down in the multi-way climate. Okay, there's going to be some implied odds, I guess, from getting there, but you're just not going to win that many big pots in those runouts against ace-x or whatever, and you're going to be able to block the top of their range and generate a lot of fold equity from better in this spot. So I decided to turn this into a bluff here, but also welcoming fold equity if they fold like overcards or whatever. The weirdest thing ever happens that it doesn't get through, and then it gets 3-bet here. I'd imagine it's just a very, very strong range, or absolute genius, but I'm going to go with the former because it's GG. The other player folded as well there for you results fiends. So yeah, great play. 10-9 here. Again, we're blind versus blind. There's a c-bet from small blind. We can call, we can raise. It doesn't really matter what we do here. I wouldn't raise to 9.5. I don't know what I'm actually doing here. I didn't really have a preference. I think my curse is going crazy elsewhere because I've got like multiple spots going on, and every so often I'm returning. Yeah, I'm clearly like not focused on this table. I'm just returning to it and like half forgetting what was going on. So we decided to call this time. This is a 4-tabling session, by the way. If you don't believe me, just look. There's loads of other tables here as well. But yeah, let's keep it to this one for now. We didn't bluff the turn here. So one thing that it's really automatic to do sometimes is that when you do like make one of these floaty calls on flop and villain checks the turn, is just start bluffing immediately. But if we think about this spot, the ace is not going to be a card we're like frantic about value betting. I'm probably just going to play like really big bets and checks here and just go for a value bet with ace-x plus or a 4. And you can bluff like 10-9 in that spot. But I also thought just wait until river, doing some stuff there is cool, like raising some small bets, maybe just folding. When checked to, we do have a river blunder theorem spot on river, which means that we are in auto bluff territory because we filtered by calling flop and they polarized, or maybe not polarized, maybe they range bet, but they bet and then checked 2 streets. So our range gains a big equity advantage here, big EV advantage. We have to bluff the river. I'm basically just sizing around, you know, what an ace does here. Like my main value bets are ace-x is a bit of queen 10 and 4x, but to check the turn with 4x is probably not something we're doing very often or perceived to be doing very often. Jack 10 on the river is just a catcher here, and honestly, I'm not, maybe it's a winning call, but I think it should become indifferent, and I think the 10, especially when that 10 is a heart or a spade, is like kind of a bad card to have. It's probably better to call pocket 9s on the river than to even call Jack 10, because we have very few value bets here containing a Jack, but plenty of bluffs containing a 10. That said, I don't know, I don't want to hate on villain's play too much. Maybe this spot's a bit over bluffed, but I don't think so after we filtered on flop here. So I think a really important concept to understand against recreationals is in it to win it. Here with deuces, like in theory, we're not meant to do anything, but we have another recreational in the big blind here. It just looks like a spot where we're going to have an edge just due to mistakes people are making post flop. We have 1 reg and 2 recreationals basically. So I think calling is right. I think leading this flop is definitely right because everyone's just going to be checking to the opener who's going to be pretty behaved here. People are going to be investing wider by calling than by betting. So just don't worry about procedure here or what you would do with other parts of your range or anything like that. Just lead these spots because you're going to get more money that way than you are by checking. It's just not going to get reopened that often. The advantage to checking is that when they do c-bet here, okay, we can check raise. But even then, like check raising against the reg here in a spot where we're face up very, very strong isn't going to be incredible. It's much better, obviously, when this player bets or this player calls the regs bet and then we get to reopen. But I think just leading and making sure that this player invests right now is just a great idea here. So I'm a big fan of just entertaining the idea of donk betting in spots like that. We do bet the turn and the reg folds, so no further money won there. But yeah, I think a great spot just to lead out and not even bother checking procedurally to the opener. Another thing you need to be really aware of when you're playing poker is, where does your edge actually reside? It resides in having skill edge in situations where ranges are wide and easy to misnavigate or sort of turn face up and end up overfolding or something, and in position and against weak players. So this is a recreational player, 28 VPIP, did not look like a reg at all. We have a hand that, like, I don't know if you look this up in a sim, it's probably going to say that 8-3 suited is like very slightly losing, like 6% of a big blind losing to flat, but I have no doubt that this is just a winning call, and we should definitely be exploiting pre-flop in all of these ways. When they check here, my plan is just to bet the flop smallish, making sure that villain calls with a ton of overcards, which is going to be most of their range, because recreationals are not going to protect this checking range much, and then I'm just barreling the hell out of the turn and bombing it and potting it, whatever it is. I might even slight overbet it. I probably won't go for a massive overbet with this combo, but I'll just make a very big bet on the turn and expect that to clean house, and if it doesn't, I've got some bailout outs to a flush and some implied odds for then hitting that flush against the turn check call range. So very happy with the plan of just always c-betting flop and then always betting turn, not mixing either of those spots, and always defending pre. An example of how we should be taking pure actions against recreationals for exploitative reasons, and a good example of a high yield exploit spot. Here we have jacks and we go for the 3-bet against a UTG min open. I think it's always correct to just isolate this sort of opener. Someone that min opens is a bit less likely to be a reg. You could go for flat here. There's someone in the small blind that you really want to play pots with. Oftentimes these players, when they're wild like this and down to their last whatever big blinds, will just take ace jack off and like ship it on you anyway. So fan of the 3-bet, or they'll cold call the 3-bet as happens here. We go 3-way against 2 cold callers. The original opener folding their king jack off or whatever they had, presumably some hand that does not like the multi-way climate. We decide to start with a check here for transparency. Obviously we are kind of happy to fail against the short stack here, but I really want to see what this tighter cold caller wants to do. They bet and this guy raises all in, and while I would have been very happy to call the all in if it was just me and the Norwegian 33 VPIP player, when this Japanese player is also in the pot, I'm using the flags just to denote who the villain is here, not saying anything about like the fact that they're from those countries and what that means. What I kind of think now is that, well, this player cold called with this guy behind, like cold calls here. His range already is probably mostly pocket pair heavy. If he does have some sort of overcards, I don't expect King Queen of Clubs to take a shot at this with this lunatic looking player behind that's going to invest all the time here and jam all the time. I think the jacks are just dead against this guy's range. They're probably surviving okay against this range here, but there's just no way you can continue here. You know, you might be upset about it. It might feel like I've got to, you know, put in another 29.6 big blinds here, but it's a really trivial fold, I think, when you break it down. Let's see if we were quote unquote right. This player's queens with a heart against ace 10. You don't need to see it, guys. It's boring. The queens hold up twice. They run it twice. They agree. This isn't good television. Just as watching whales punt off against each other isn't good television, we don't really need to care about this. I mean, if you enjoyed this guy winning both against ace 10 there, you know, you might want to get better taste in poker content. Clearly, it's our decision here that's the important part, the true EV of that play. Definitely want to be folding there. All right, next. So here we went for an open with ace 9 offsuit, and the flop was just the ace of diamonds. Sometimes this happens on GG where only one card comes out on the flop. And if we think about the true EV of this spot, the best hand villain can have here is ace 10, right? Because they can only have a pair of aces. We basically have the nuts. Okay, they could have ace jack, but that's probably going to 3-bet pre a lot. Ace queen and ace king are probably pure 3-bets pre. So ace 9 is like the second nuts in this spot because it's only an ace, right? Can't have any sets here because you don't have pocket aces. So I think letting them bluff like the 5 high, there's only going to be 3 cards here by the river when this glitch actually happens. So probably just checking and trapping here is the way to go. Just kidding, 3 cards came out in the flop. If you believed me there, you don't deserve to play the watching YouTube game. Go for the small bet because I don't think ace king 6 gets stabbed as much as the other flops do. Decided I would maybe go for like a cheeky check raise here on turn or something. In hindsight, I just don't think I love this against a 15 VPIP. I think I'd rather just bet big. Then we decided to overbet river with what is now basically the immortal nuts. The thought here is that villain just has an absolute ton of bad ace and king X. That's just going to be a huge part of their range. And I think going for a massive sizing against that makes a lot of sense. If they have like queen jack, queen 10, they're probably not bluffing river enough anyway. Miss diamonds, they might just check down. We see this behavior all the time in this pool. So going for any sizing that relies on being bluffed or raised or whatever, I just don't like. So going big on river's right. But I think we should just bet turn there. I don't really know what was going on with the check. I mean, clearly in theory, you're allowed to check a lot out of position, right? But I just think in this pool, it's not so good. Here's a spot where I think people are quite sensitive to bet sizing. So this was a recreational player At one point, they were not fully stacked, right? So we kind of knew this. We check back ace-9. They lead the turn. I think we have a very easy continue here with the gutter. We're beating all bluffs. The king demotes our showdown value, just puts us near the bottom of our range. We do have some showdown value here, but I think we do a lot better by bluffing. And I decided to use the overbet sizing because they're just going to have a really merged range. They're going to have 8x, they have pocket 9s, they're going to have 6x, they're going to have 5s, they're going to have 3s, they're going to have all these hands that shouldn't really have led the turn. Ace jack, ace queen. I think if we're not bluffing this hand, we're really making a big mistake here. So going for small overbet, because at the point where we reach overbet, probably they're no longer that elastic. So I'd rather go for a smaller overbet than a bigger one, because I think it's going to be reacted to in the same way, right? Where they continue a king or a 10 or some slow play or some flush and fold practically everything else. So just going for that sizing that puts them in that box while also doesn't waste additional stuff against the top of their range. This is another really exploitative type spot where we have king queen in the small blind. We decide to peel here. Squeeze is an option. Like, squeeze is not horrible here. We're against under the gun though, and multiple opponents, so fold equity is not going to be amazing. I think I prefer call, but it's definitely close. And now, like, if we check what happens, well, probably into 3 other people, the preflop raiser does not c-bet 5s, because who wants to do that into like 2 cold callers here in real life? It's probably going to be really underfolded, because people are meant to fold like ace jack to c-bets probably now and stuff like that, because multi-way is like a really harsh climate. So I decided I would just lead here, and we could probably just lead bigger, honestly, but I did just want to make sure some money went in here against the recreationals in particular. I also thought if I lead small enough, then this player is going to kind of tell me what they have. They're probably not going to be able to help but to raise with the set or straight here. So now I feel really good about my hand. I'm going to start sizing up and betting bigger. This is like funneling, you know, like you're kind of like a border collie, just like trying to herd sheep into pens. It's like I've done X on flop. They've reacted in this way. So now I can do Y on turn. So just going for the bigger sizing now. It's probably still not overbet worthy, but yeah, just going for a larger turn sizing here in villain folds. Another thing we really want to do is make sure that when recreational players open, I didn't recognize this player. I assumed they were recreational once again, because just most people are, quite frankly. If you're playing pools like this, then we want to get involved with like break-even hands. This is another high yield exploit spot where being in position in a 3-bet pot as the aggressor is just going to force them to play, you know, a lesser skilled opponent's going to play very straightforwardly. We're hopefully going to have a bigger edge here, and we want to understand where that edge comes from as well. So like when we c-bet here, we probably don't get raised enough, and that just makes c-betting like a really high EV play with a vulnerable thin value hand. So the turn comes to deuce of diamonds, they check again. I think we have a pretty clear check back on this node. And one thing that recreational players will do is they'll call the flop like fairly wide. So I wouldn't be shocked if like ace 10, ace jack, stuff like that was in range. When they go third pot here, yes, it's mainly going to be like a value range, but I'm much happier to call here against the recreational than I would be against the regular. And there's still loads of combos like the king jack of clubs and ace 10 and stuff like that. It is annoying that like jack 10 and 6-7 get there, and the 9 pairs. It's one of the least appetizing spots I've seen to like call a block bet on the river, but with it being an unknown, I wouldn't be shocked if we actually won against ace 5 or 6s or 4s or 7s or something that has no business playing this way. So this is a bluff catcher in GTO, because villains shouldn't be blocking worse than an 8 when they have a made hand, but in practice, I do think we just win in some weird ways here. So, you know, needing 20% equity to call against third pot, I think we've just got to go ahead and make this call, and we're probably going to get more of the pot than that, but probably not more than about 25 to 30% would be my feeling on a run out like this. But you've still got to call those spots. We can't go folding spots where we think we have more pot share than we need. So I think we do call here. And do we win this time? No, we run into 10-9, which is kind of a thin river block, but I guess it's all right. I might have been inclined to block smaller if I was going to block that hand. But anyway, let's move on. So this is quite an interesting hand. It starts off with us in the big blind, and we call a min open from button. The flop is 8-6-5, and we could start with a donk bet here actually, but this hand, I don't hate it. I don't think people are raising these enough, but we have such bad equity, and people might, this isn't a board where people are going to be like range betting usually, so we'll have some chances to lead turn. We have a bad bailout gutter here, but I think bluffing this turn is still just wildly winning because people are not protecting the checking range enough on flop. We go for the really small sizing, which I like, because villain is never going to be folding like overcards with club. It's probably going to be overfolding like the king queen off here if we just go small on this texture. And on the river, like their range again is going to be a mix of like one pair stuff like 8x, 6x, ace 5, etc., ace king, ace queen with no club, and that stuff is really, really weak now, and I think it will fold to like very small bets. And then hands that have just improved like 7x or club of some sort, which is like never going to be folding, right? So the fourth flush card is much better for the pre-flop aggressor, for the button, and in theory we have to give up an absolute ton here and just check fold a lot of our range. But in practice, like with 3 high, I just think block betting the river is going to yield 25% plus fold equity, and so it's going to be the best play. It's going to be better than giving up. So we decided to do this. It usually won't work, but if it works more than a quarter of the time, then we're beginning to make money. Rake not counted for now. Villain raises me fold. Enough said. I like to talk about these really like mundane pre-flop exploit spots where like we have a hand that's just outside of what would be a normal 3-bet range, but we have a min open from what's probably a weak player, and we decide to just go ahead and 3-bet this hand. If we get 4-bet way less often than GTO demands, then right away this hand's just going to over-realize. I think people are going to not just under 4-bet pre, but also overfold flop and under raise flop and just not be sticky or challenging enough to play against, so we just decide to go ahead and 3-bet that one. Alex Pinheiro on Carrot Corner has a series called Aggress to Impress, and one of the things that happens in that series is we look at spots where theoretically you're allowed to like overbet turns with nothing. I think that's like episode 7 of Aggress to Impress, maybe 6, but it's like turn overbets with nothing. And this is under the gun against big blind. We've gone for the small flop c-bet, villain's called. It's your classic, like, very favorable top of range situation where under the gun's range is just like drowning in really, really high EV combos that want to play for a lot of money. And big blind has this capped range that's like just kind of trying to survive out of position. So in this situation here, it's a great spot just to use some sweet spot slight overbet sizing against a recreational player and just go for a size that is an overbet, but isn't a very big overbet and just looks like it's in a bigger sizing band than it is. So I almost go for 12.2 here. Hopefully I size this down a bit. I go down to 10.2 exactly. So just using that elasticity, just trying to use a better sizing that will give me more bang for my buck. And you don't really need much equity in these situations. So much of the opponent's range is just going to be like, if not overfolding, like folding in theory anyway. But a lot of it will be overfolding. But the main point is just that when you have a hand like this in game theory that unblocks the call flop fold turn range like 5-4 does and blocks stuff like king 5 king 4 that doesn't fold, you just probably have a winning bluff even with very minimal bailout equity to fourth pair. Like you do win sometimes, by the way, when villain calls ace deuce of spades on turn or ace queen and you hit the 5 or the 4 on river, so your hand's not dead, it's drawing to this sort of bailout equity. And it could even be the kind of hand that's meant to go for triples in GTO here because it blocks river 2 pair of like king 5 and king 4 or something like that. That wouldn't surprise me if we hit the 5 and we're meant to triple, or hit the 4 and we're meant to triple, or something like that. But yeah, thought we'd just show that because going for that slight overbet on turn, you don't actually need equity. This hand is doing fine. There's enough fold equity to make it okay. And you know, if you check, your EV is basically 0 anyway. So it just needs to be slightly winning to be the best line. One exploit to recognize is when you get like a wild looking recreational, like one with a VPIP above like 35, they're going to be really volatile and they tend to be much more aggressive than ones that have the VPIP of like 28 or whatever. That's just a good sort of trend for you, right? Because VPIP is a very quick to converge stat that generally just tells a general picture of how somebody is playing. So when we check back this flop, we're going to get leads on this turn from all sorts of nonsense. The king turn is meant to be basically played as like overbet check, and it's meant to be played with like an 80% check frequency and a 20% overbet frequency in GTO. This is so absurd compared to what's actually happening. In real life, like 5s is leading, ace deuce is leading, all sorts of hands are leading here. We have a very trivial call down here against this third pot. And look at the type of hands that you can get to invest money here by checking back. Like a7, okay, this might call a flop c-bet, but there's so many hands in villain's range here that are just going to spew at you because they have no idea how big blind is meant to be contained here, like how controlled you need to be as big blind against buttons. So I just checked the flop, really overprotected. I checked like a bunch of my 8x in this sort of spot, and then just called twice. Said, yeah, sometimes I let villain get there because they just improved with like a queen 5 to a pair of queens that was folding the flop. But overall, I don't really care because the money we make here by them just spewing at you on the turn when they're a high VPIP player like this far outweighs anything that you lose by like letting them improve. Sometimes they're calling you anyway with the hands that would have improved if you bet flop, and then they're just getting there in a bigger pot. So big fan of check here. I think it's a missed thing. I think if you guys are range betting this situation against the 49 VPIP, honestly, you're just approaching this spot so far from how you should be that you're throwing away a ton of money. So think about your hand, play your hand against the 49 VPIP player and figure out what's best with it. Stop playing your range, stop taking actions across your whole range against 49 VPIP opponents. Episode 1 of True EV on Carrot Corner, the subscriber service, is all about how to handle playing against strong ranges, right? So here we get 4-bet blind versus blind, and normally with 9s, you know, blind versus blind, you're allowed to shove, and it's probably like as good as calling, or the EVs are like really, really close between calling and jamming. We just decided to call here because honestly, getting 9s in pre, even in late position, like against this pool, against a soft pool, just doesn't make any sense, right? It's like if you played 1-2 live and someone 4-bet you, it wouldn't really matter that you were playing blind versus blind. It would still be really bad to get in 9s for like 100 and something big blinds. Okay, you're usually deeper than that, but the opens are bigger, 1-2 live, so it works out the same. But yeah, you just don't want to get this in pre. You just want to flat and you want to take the pot odds and you want to just like try and hit a set and try and play some poker and survive and make some hero folds after the flop, right? You just want to be really, really tight here because you're getting 4-bet about half as often in this pool as you're meant to be or something like that. It figures then that if you do just go ahead and flop the nuts like this, you just want to fast play because a 6, a 7, a diamond, there's lots of runouts here that kill action against overpairs. If villain has an overpair, they're basically never folding to the flop raise. You could also jam this spot with the idea that like if they have an overpair, they're probably never folding. I decided to leave the door open here for like ace king to jam on me. I think it's going to be so infrequent though that you could even argue that the jam is a better play than raise small, but you definitely want to be raising this spot. So going back to this donk bet idea, another weapon that I use really frequently in this pool as I'm developing a feel for just exactly how to maximize true EV is donking spots like this. I think people over c-bet a little bit here and I'm not super comfortable checking and giving them, well, I don't mind. It's not that I mind giving them like a free card so much, although this is like a really decent board for big blind's range. It's more like big blind favored if it's against under the gun, by the way, where there's more asymmetry and under the gun has less of these small cards that make the nuts. But anyway, back to the main point here. It's not that I hate giving them a free card. It's just that when I donk bet, I don't think they've raised enough on this texture. I think they're going to broadcast their equity kind of face up and they're going to give us a really easy time to just barrel them off of their range by the river. So just starting with a small bet and then continuing to apply pressure here, I think it's probably the highest EV way to go. Villain calls, we get a dream turn for range, really like one of the best turns we can get for this hand without actually hitting something, without the 8 coming or the queen. And yeah, we just b75 because villain does have some stuff at the top like 4x now. And this should be enough to make them fold, not just over cards, but also combos like 10s and jacks and queens are going to be folding here in real life, I think, because it's just super uncomfortable and this pool can trend quite nitty. So yeah, fan of that one. All right, let's talk bet size equals hand strength for a second then. So we have recreational player going for 1 big blind on 10-9-6. This is kind of like a red flag to a bull for me. Like when I see this sizing, I've learned that it's just a really, really weak range compared to a different sizing. We went for the 5.9 raise here. This should be enough to get villain off of lots of their range already, but we can just continue to apply pressure to all of like gut shots like queen jack, king jack, king queen, hands that play this way. I really hated this turn card though, because I think a lot of the button bet call range on the flop is actually geared around this region of the board. They're going to have quite a lot of stuff with a queen in it, king jack, etc. I don't think they're going to have a ton of auto folds now. We do block like something like the 7 and the 5 here, which decreases our fold equity somewhat. And it's not that I'm saying blockers are why I'm not betting this turn. The reason I'm not betting this particular turn is I think it improves villain's range quite a lot. Even ace king like might not fold now with the gutter, right, to the nuts. And just the quality of our outs has just gone way down, right? Like our redraw is just terrible now. So I think this is probably a give up. And that's not to say we're giving up for the entire hand. Villain's going to show us what they have on river. They do check back here. And now I'm trying to find a bet size that works. Like really the best thing to do now is to think about the opponent's range. So they're going to have like very little ace x on this node unless they've just hit 2 pair, right? So their range kind of pulls out like ace 10, ace 9, ace 6, ace queen. That stuff's going to be really strong and probably not folding to any sizing. They probably don't have king jack or something like that, but you never know. Sometimes they do slow play these nodes. So the majority of their range at this point is probably just king 10, king 9, pocket 7s, pocket 8s, 9, 8, 6, 7. This is a massive band of hands like queen jack, king queen, a massive, massive band of hands that we shouldn't need to bet gigantic to make them fold. So I think I just screwed up this river sizing really badly in game here. I don't like what I did at all. I think we can just go like 18 here and generate enough fold equity against like the 3rd pair type stuff. There's a lot of fold equity against those hands against the fish because they just play in absolute hand strength terms. And I don't know what I'm thinking here, getting lost in the weeds of some kind of like, I'm going to go huge because they can't have king jack and I can, and I'm going to try and make them fold like, I don't know, what am I hoping happens here that doesn't happen if I just use a small overbet? I think this is really punty and spewy, and it's just a sure way to maximize your losses against like ace 10, ace 9, etc. or some slow play without really gaining anything against this folding range. So we got away with it this time, like they did fold, but I think this is just really spewy and punty and just something I need to stop doing. It's like some old bad habit from like the GTO days of like, my range has this stuff, I would have slow played turn with king jack, I've got this nut advantage at the top, 7-5 might be a hand that goes for massive bets in GTO, so I'm going to do it. In real life, it's not optimal against this pool. And finally, time for a bit more nittery. There's an open, we go for the ISO with the ace king off, and we get 4-bet. We get 4-bet big as well. I honestly wonder how bad it would be to just fold our hand at this point. We're getting 4-bet by someone like at 100 Russian cash GG that just went 3x under the gun against cutoff. Like maybe ace king can just be folded. Anyway, I wasn't quite ready to bring myself to that level of nittery, so I decided to call, and I just folded the flop because I was like, okay, well, the queen has just got their range probably has no bluffs. If they did have ace 5 or ace 4, they've both hit. So this is just like death was this board. Like our outs are kind of tainted. The king is not an out against aces. The ace is not an out against ace queen. There's just lots of reasons to just go ahead and just not even mess with this spot. Like their range is way too strong. We're just folding flop here immediately. Now this player, I wasn't sure who they were at first, but they turned out to be a little bit more active in the end. Like 26 VPIP, they've been playing quite a lot of hands. They didn't look like the stereotypical like nitty player, certainly. Not the leaderboard guy that's just like putting it in hands, trying to stay out of trouble. So checking this board, the reason I don't dunk this one is that I think this board's over c-bet, right? So it's not like the 6-5-4 that's like terrifying. People are just c-betting too often, I think, on this particular type of flop. So we went for a check call instead. Bigger sizing here is whatever. I'm not reading too much into it, like a lot of people do this on GG. Although if this was like a nitty fish or something, I would read into it a lot more. The jack is a great card for us because we basically have the powerhouse GTO bluff catcher, meaning we unblock like as many bluffs as possible. Yes, our jack 8 is not going to be an overpair, but it's also going to be like a value catcher now against like ace jack or something like that. I think a clear call on turn. And on river, we block so many value hands and no bluffs at all here. We have literally the most pure bluff catcher combo we can have. Blockers aren't everything. That swing can only be a few percent, but it's going to be the higher end of a few percent with these particular blockers. So yeah, we do decide to bluff catch river here with this combo. I don't think that we have a value beater anymore against this sizing. I think villain's repping clearly overpair plus, maybe straight plus, maybe trips plus, I don't know. But I just figured with this particular hand blocking so many boats and unblocking all the bluffs, we'd go for it. And this opponent's clearly over bluffing, right? It looks like from the fact they've bet turn and river here with this hand, they're just not giving up enough, and that's a good thing to note. All right, guys, I have no idea if that's been 30 hands. It feels like it must have been. If it's not, we'll just change the title to 29 hands in 38 minutes, which doesn't sound as good. But let me know what you think about this sort of format. I'll make more of these if you like it. If you like the whole True EV hand review style, there's more of that over at Carrot Corner, the True EV series, plus 3 videos per week. We have 64 or 67 out now, depending on when you watch this. I'm recording this a couple of weeks in advance, so I'm taking a bit of time off. But yeah, we'll be back soon with more. Click that top link, check out True EV at Carrot Corner, and we'll see you on another video very soon. Bye-bye.